Hi, good morning. It's Juan at PSL. Um, it's actually 20 degrees warmer this morning than it was yesterday. It's 66. Yesterday it's at 46. So we're making progress. Spring training is here. Um, the exciting time. Let me tell you about being a transit cop. Best job I ever had by far. Um, Most fun I ever had. And as I said in other previous videos, I'm thankful for the guys I met and girls, but mostly guys. And some of us are still lifelong friends 40 something years later. I think it's 44 years later. So let me tell you about working on the trains. Started off in uniform. If this is your first video, if not, I'm just gonna get a quick, brief overview to catch you up. Came out of class of 1982, about 450 strong. Transit at that time was separate from NYPD. Same pay scale, uh, same uniform, just a different patch, different shield. Um, but I didn't feel any less of a cop working as transit. I felt just as good as being an NYPD cop. So, and when I became a cop, I knew absolutely nothing. I didn't have a friend that I can ask, how the job was, and I didn't have anybody to pick their brain. Like today, um, some of us, can point to a cop and walk up to him and say, "Hey, how's it going? How's the job? How's this and that?" They may or may not answer, but at least you have that option. Back then, I wouldn't even know where to start. I didn't know what the commands were. I didn't know if they would talk to me. I mean, it seemed like everybody was a senior guy. When we got out of the academy, there was a class 3 months ahead of us. And then after that, there might have been a class 2 or 3 years ahead of us, which I had a couple of friends from. And then after that, I think it was like a 10-year gap. So it's a severe gap. You're walking in a command, you're walking as a rookie. You're going to do TPF because that's what rookies do. Get your training, get your seasoning, get your experience as you work by yourself on the trains after you've done your probationary period, not probationary period, but your initial training. You're still on probation, I think for 2 years it was probation. So a lot of the senior guys that I met, not all of them, the ones I met, they really didn't want you around them because they thought you were internal affairs. Because you posed the right opportunity for internal affairs to infiltrate the command. They call them field agents, field associates, whatever term sounds right. And I wasn't, but I remember thinking, wow, I mean, they showed you around because they had to. You were assigned to them, and they showed you um, some of the ropes, and they showed you some of the rooms in the stations that before that, you walk by as a passenger, you walk by, you didn't know what was there, but it ended to be locker rooms, trains. What do you call that? Train hubs. They had employee locations. They had um, staff rooms separate. You learn all this after you get some seasoning. You start picking up your keys. You end up with a 1,000 keys if you want to be um, if you want to be, how you call it, into the system where you can go take a personal at a public view. If back in those days there were some restaurants and little food stands and little one station in the Bronx had a nightclub in between the subway level and the and the platform, um, the street and the platform. Right in between there was a subway, a nightclub, and so that was an experience. I didn't know that was there. Um, so you're picking up tips here and there, and just learning how to become a cop and learning the tricks, the stations. You looked at the tunnels and you said, you're not supposed to go in there. So you avoided them in the beginning just to make sure. Some stations have people living down in the subways. I remember once I had to work Bowery on the J, and that wasn't an area that I normally frequent. I try to stay in the Bronx. I stood in Manhattan up to 42nd Street because that's where the train ran. The train ran the train patrol was from Times Square to 241st on my particular command. I'm sure there were other commands that had covered the train the other way into Brooklyn. But my particular one was Grand Central to Woodlawn and Times Square to 241st on the number 2 up in White Plains in the Bronx. And you patrolled your trains, and basically your sergeant and your command notified you your job was to stay on the train as long as possible. Try to complete the run. We had time runs, so the sergeant can look at his watch and say somebody's supposed to be on this train, and he knew that somebody was because he had a copy of the roll call. So unless you had an incident on the train or you spotted something on the station from the train, then you can get off and you can explain it. You would have to explain it. It wasn't you just got off anywhere you wanted and made up a story. You pretty much had to explain to your supervisor, which was the sergeant on patrol, why you got off the train. So you learn to give summonses on the train, which was a trick, because you had to learn how to balance yourself on 2 feet without holding on as you're writing. Try to write legibly, and then also keep an eye on the person you're writing a ticket to, because then a lot of them weren't happy. You just put an interruption into their partying, their screaming, their fighting, their urinating in between the cars, riding between the cars. All kinds of minor violations were ticketable. And as a cop, you had you wrote tickets that established your authority on the train, but it also pissed off the people on the train. For years they got away with doing whatever they want, and then we were only the second class to be on the trains. Your more senior cops, they might have rode the train to their stop, but they didn't patrol the train up and down like you were supposed to. We had 10 cars on your assigned train, and that's where you patrolled. You went from one car to the other. Let people see you, high visibility. Also, catch any violations and address it. And once you got good, then you started timing the train so that you can see the front doors, where the token booths were. And as you looked at the token booths and you're passing on a train, you saw people flying over the turnstiles or going through the exit gate to enter the train without paying. And that was a ticketable offense, but it also was a misdemeanor. So you had the and or. If they had good ID, they went along with it. You didn't expect people to be happy to get a ticket, but you didn't expect them to fight you either. If you fought me, then that was an additional charge. Gave me an excuse to bring you in to the command for processing. Gave me an excuse to place you under arrest and search you and see what else you have on you. And a lot of these guys have weapons on them. A lot of these guys have warrants. Don't forget, we're talking about being in the early 80s. Even if you got a ticket, most people threw it out. Very few people cared about, I got a court date next month. And because they usually gave them, I think, 30, 35 days leeway to go to court. And you got to assign them a court date. And then in a perfect world, they would go to that court date and answer to the charge, even if they wanted to fight it. They had the opportunity to fight the ticket. But a lot of people, from what I understand, because, we got warrants for a while. Just about everybody we stopped for a while I'm talking about years for a while, had warrants. And usually the warrants for unpaid fines, unpaid tickets, unpaid not returning to the court, as assigned. If you went to the court and you pled not guilty and they told you to come back at a future date, we'll get the officer here, and then now you had to go to court again. A lot of people just brushed that aside and just said, I'm not doing that. I'm just gonna ignore it and let and it's not gonna catch up to me, they thought. So now you stop them for hopping a train. A lot of people hopped the train. You couldn't catch, as a matter of fact, you couldn't catch all of them. So you caught one or two at the most. If you're by yourself, if you had a partner, then you caught an extra person for him. One for you, one for him. Whatever it came down to. At least with a partner or somebody that was on the station or riding the train to catch up to his train, because he had a summons and now he has to get on the next train and catch up to the terminal, try to, so that way he can keep his train run schedule correct. And that was the joys of working as a rookie on the trains, 8Ps. 8Ps was 8 p.m. to 4 at night. If you're first time here, is a transit police term. I don't know if NYPD had 8Ps, but they were mostly car assignments. 2 guys to a car, 2 officers to a car. If they had a foot post, it might have been like around the precinct perimeter, a high-profile place. I'm not going to say they didn't have foot posts. They probably did. I just wasn't aware of a lot of their patrol schedules and that stuff like that. So I can speak clearly on being a transit cop the first 13 years of my life, and in the last about 7.5 years, I was NYPD to do my 20. I thought it was a great job. It was a very active job. You came to work knowing that, stuff was going to go down. There wasn't, we after we had some training, then of course there were more academy classes, and then we had to do the training on the subways to show the new people how we patrol, how we walk up and down the train, how we wave at conductors to let them know that we're on the train, just in case somebody's screaming for help 4 or 5 cars up and you don't hear it because of the train noise and because of the normal traffic where you're at. So the conductor, having seen you got on the train, he would either blow his horn, long, short was the code in those days. I don't know if it still works today, but it was a long short, or he had a PA system where he could say, officer, come up to, the first or second car. There's a fight going on. Whatever, robbery, somebody's getting assaulted. Something to alert you to know. Get off the train, run down the platform, catch and go into the right car. By then, you would see the crowd and the yelling, the screaming, and all that stuff. And you would respond, and you would have, whatever you got into, whether it was domestic, whether it was somebody robbing somebody, stabbing somebody. I mean, crimes were rampant on the subways. And I'm reminding you, it's 8 at night to 4 in the morning. So a lot of your average working people are home. We ran into the good person that hung out after work and went for a couple of drinks and maybe had too many drinks, and maybe they were drunk, and maybe they acted up like they wouldn't normally act up, but because they were drunk, they acted up, got into a fight with somebody, or somebody saw how intoxicated they were and decided that he was going to be the next victim. Stuff like that. I mean, once in a while you did run into good people. They worked the late shift. Like I said, they hung out after work, and now they're on the trains with not the group of people that they normally associate with. You got younger people that would stay at home and sleep all day and come out at night hunting for victims. Ride the trains. They hopped the train, they got on, and they didn't get stopped, didn't get caught, so the night continues. Then they get on the train, sometimes with a buddy or two, sometimes by themselves, depending on, what their plan was. And then they pick a victim on the train, or pick a victim on the platform, commit their crime, and then they're speedsters. They can run like the wind. They slept all day. They're not tired. They're young, so they got all that extra energy. And then you find a transit cop trying to chase these guys down. Well, a lot of them were track stars. At your best day, you couldn't catch them, and then you think about all the equipment and the uniform consists of. I just think that when I worked plain clothes, it was easier because you had a partner. One guy was quicker than the other. Sometimes we worked in unmarked vehicles, unmarked vans, and so it was easier to chase. If you saw the crime go down, the guy didn't see that you saw. Now you're following until you can, catch him. You're calling for backup. And you dealt with crime. It was a very busy time. I loved it. There was just crime was just too rampant in the early 80s. About 84 to 85, I got put into off of rookie patrol. I ended up doing 2 years. I could have got out sooner, but the only thing that was being offered was working a rotating shift every week. 1 week days, 1 week 4 to 12s, 1 week midnights. And that would have messed up my body. I preferred a steady shift with a steady, where eventually you got built up a routine, and I like that. The other one, I didn't know it was coming or going. I didn't like it. I tried it for a little bit, and I volunteered for midnights after when I was all discombobulated, because some day shifts, depending on what day of the week, you had to come in 3 hours or 4 hours early. So that meant coming in at 3:30, 4:30 in the morning. And a lot of times you forgot that what the schedule was. And, you know, you were all messed up. Like I said, you were all messed up. You can't get your sleeping right because you're sleeping at different times of the day. The shift, I think it was 4 on, 2 off. Also, you work 4 days on, 2 days off. So your days off change by 1 day every week. So you eventually, after 6 weeks or whatever the math was, you ended up getting a weekend off. So that was another thing you had to get used to. To me, that wasn't terrible because I was a young man. I could probably party on a Wednesday just as good as I could party on a Friday, Saturday night. But different time, different era. How do you call it? I volunteered for a daytime patrol, noon. I think it was like 10:30 to 7 or 11:30 to 8. Maybe 1 week one and then 1 week the other. Only an hour difference though, so you that was easier to acclimate to. Plus, it was daytime, so you got to see a lot of normal people, just normal people carrying on about their business, and there was crime obviously in the daytime, but it wasn't as highlighted as it was at night. I feel the night shift just brung out criminals. They prefer the darkness. They prefer, it helped them be stealthy. It helped them to disappear into the night after they committed a crime. Like I said, victims on the train sometimes weren't at their best condition. Except for the ones that worked like steady nights, they were alert because they had a steady routine. But you had occasionally people that went out and, halfway drunk. Who attacked you? I think it was a black guy. I think it was a black girl. Not, a Spanish guy, dark skin, light skin, whatever. They gave you vague descriptions, and you couldn't solve that crime unless somebody else came forward and said, or the conductor said, yeah, I saw the guy run this way, I saw that run that way, he used that stairway, he went down 5 minutes ago, gave you something. A lot of these people will require medical aid. I was very lucky that we had EMS. They were the medical response teams that the city had. Later on, towards the end of my career, they merged with fire department and became fire department employees. They stayed doing their jurisdiction and they stayed with their titles of paramedics and stuff like that, but they were now within the fire department chain of command. But I think that was just for admin purposes. But they were great response time, fearless. They were coming to shooting locations and come tend to the wounded while you're standing there, looking at the crowd, looking to see if anybody's going to retaliate, looking to see if anybody fits the description. If you got there, soon enough. A lot of times stuff spilled out off the train into the platforms, into the stairways. The clerk called 911 or had her dispatcher call 911, and that's how we got notified. And we were given locations, we were giving how many people are fighting, who's hurt. Sometimes you would get that information. Sometimes you just got a location, respond for, a fight, respond for a robbery victim, an assault victim. A lot of people got, stabbed and shot on the subway. after, I imagine, verbal disputes. And you responded to that too. You were on the train, but if you were to pass in that station and that station was on your route and that crime came over, you can get off your train and respond to that crime. You notify dispatch. That way, your boss would hear it, or he would get notified later on if he asks where you were. You can say, "Hey, I responded to this. I responded to that. I got involved in this." Another also called for help. That was a common call. We all called for 85s and 13s in those days, depending on the situation, because we were one-man patrol. If a crowd assembles and the crowd is anti-police or they're not having a good day, same difference. You had to, call for somebody to come by, and at that point you didn't care who it was that came by. Sometimes NYPD would get the call upstairs. It could have been the guys in the cars. Every command had a couple of cars. 99.9% senior guys, and some of them carried two radios. They carried our transit radio, which was, in those days, wasn't effective. There was a lot of bad spots where transmissions didn't get through, or they came out garbled, or not clear. And then there were stations that were, once the train went into a tunnel, there was a lot of more dead spots, and you can yell for backup all you want. You wasn't getting through. So if the conductor or the motorman heard you were near their car, you were in their car, and they heard a fight, they would call their dispatch, and their dispatch would call our dispatch. So that was like a unofficial backup channel, but that was if you were close to them. The train cars were 10 cars long, so there was only a conductor in the middle, fifth or sixth car. I don't remember the math on that. It's been a long time, which car he was in, but it was towards the middle, and then obviously the motorman was in the front of the train, the very first car driving the train. So if you were in the first car, he might be able to peer out and see what the commotion was, and then call for assistance that way. But if you were in the second and third car, fourth car, there was a very good chance neither one of these guys was gonna hear you, unless when the doors open, it spilled out into the platform, or people came running out, because somebody got shot, somebody got stabbed. And then, they would see, and then they would either stop the train and, look for if it was near them. If it was near them, they weren't going to patrol the train. But if they saw somebody yelling, "Hey, that person's been shot, that person's been stabbed," they need medical attention, they need assistance, then, they would get involved. But it wasn't their job to get involved. So, they try to do their job as well as they could without being involved. It wasn't, I'm not going to say it wasn't their problem, but it wasn't their duty to get involved. They weren't armed. Some of them, may have assisted people. I'm not going to say all. I can't speak for it. In this talk, I'm speaking in general terms as much as possible. I'm not going to name individual cases, and if I do, I'm going to be vague about it, because the laws surrounding some cases. So yeah, train patrol was an experience. It was perfect for somebody that's learning, because there was so much to learn. Like I said before, just riding the trains without holding on. I held on if there was no action going on, or the train was going extremely fast. Some of them they had, you know, curves and stations that were more than a minute away or 2 minutes away. And then the other stations, they came up pretty quick. They were, you know, only a couple of blocks away from each other. So it was always something. After a while, you learned, like I mentioned earlier, you learn where to stand in the car so you can see the guy hopping the train, and he didn't see that you saw him. He gets on the train. He thinks he's done his good deed by saving his, I think it was 60 cents. It might have been cheaper than that in the 80s, the subway fare, 60 cents. But he took a chance on 60 cents. He didn't buy a token. He didn't pay his fare. And now that's an introduction. As I mentioned in other videos, that was an introduction for you to get involved. Let me get some ID. And so you hop the train, you know, and you see the deflate. A lot of them had a deflated look at them like, wow, you know, I saved 60 cents, but now I got stopped by the cop, you know. And like I said, it could have been, you know, possible arrest. It was definitely a summons or a YD if he was a juvenile. Turned out he was under 16. Yeah, I think it was under 16 was a YD. So you were busy. You were busy. I remember getting up to about 250 summonses a month in activity. That's how busy I was. And I've reached my location. I hope you like and subscribe. I appreciate you staying to the end of the video. It's free to like and subscribe. Please consider it. It helps us with our channel. And until next time, be well.